Summer, 1944. Normandy, France. German Panther tanks roam the bogage, the thick hedgerows that crisscross the French countryside. They are the apex predators of the battlefield. Heavily armored, powerfully armed, nearly invincible. American Sherman tanks are outgunned and out-armored. But there is one vehicle the Panther crews have learned to fear. Not because it's better, but because it's different. Fast, agile, deadly. When German tankers see it approaching, they don't laugh anymore. This is the story of a tank that was never supposed to work. A vehicle so unconventional that even the American generals questioned it. Lightly armored, undergunned by conventional standards, built for a war doctrine that most militaries didn't believe in. The M18 Hellcat, and the men who proved that sometimes the weapon you underestimate is the weapon that kills you. To understand how the Hellcat became legendary, we must first understand the tank war that was raging across Europe in 1944. A war where firepower and armor seemed to be everything, where bigger was better, where heavier meant safer. German tank doctrine had proven this thesis again and again. Panthers, Tigers, King Tigers. These were the machines that dictated terms on European battlefields. American tankers, by comparison, felt like they were driving coffins. M4 Shermans were fast, but they couldn't stop a Panther round. Multiple Shermans would die to kill one Panther. The math was brutal. The exchange rate was terrible. But then there was the Hellcat, a tank destroyer so radical in concept that it seemed almost foolish. To understand why the M18 Hellcat existed, we need to understand the crisis the American military faced in 1943. The M4 Sherman was the backbone of American armored forces. It was reliable, produced in massive numbers, easy to maintain. But it had one fatal flaw. It couldn't consistently penetrate German tank armor. When a Sherman 75mm gun fired at a Panther at normal combat ranges, the round often bounced off, literally ricocheted away. The armor was just too thick. German crews knew this. They weren't afraid of Shermans. They knew that if they maintained distance, they could kill Shermans all day without significant risk. A Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor at 1,500 yards. A Sherman 75mm could barely penetrate Panther armor at 500 yards. The math was devastating. American tankers had to get 3 times closer to be effective, which meant they got killed 3 times easier. American generals saw this problem and knew something had to change. They needed a weapon that could take on German heavy armor, something with superior firepower or superior mobility, or both. In 1942, the U.S. Ordnance Department did something radical. They asked a question that flew in the face of conventional wisdom. What if we don't build a heavily armored tank? What if we build the opposite? What if we build something fast enough to outmaneuver any German tank, agile enough to strike from unexpected angles, armed with a gun powerful enough to penetrate any German armor? Standard military doctrine said this was impossible. You can't have speed, maneuverability, and firepower in one vehicle. You have to choose 2 out of 3. But American engineers weren't bound by European tank doctrine. They were willing to try something different. They designed the M18 Hellcat, tank destroyer, not technically a tank. Here were the specifications. Weight, 17.5 tons, compared to Panther at 45 tons. Main armament, 76 millimeters, compared to Panther's 75 millimeters. The Hellcat's 76 millimeter gun could penetrate Panther armor at combat ranges, and the Hellcat could move at 60 miles per hour. The Panther's maximum speed, 34 miles per hour. In terms of acceleration and maneuverability, there was no comparison. When German tankers first saw the Hellcat specifications, their reaction was dismissive. It was so lightly armored. A heavy machine gun could penetrate it at close range. German officers literally mocked the design. They said, "A vehicle that fast must be made of tin foil. It will fall apart in combat. Our Panzers will tear it to pieces." But they were wrong about one critical thing. They were judging the Hellcat by conventional tank doctrine, not understanding that the Hellcat wasn't designed to fight by those rules. The M18 Hellcat was a tank destroyer. This meant that it was designed with one purpose: destroy tanks. Not defend positions, not support infantry primarily. Kill enemy tanks quickly, efficiently. The specifications were revolutionary for their time. Length, 26 foot 6 inches. Beam, 9 foot 8 inches. Height, 8 foot 4 inches. Relatively small, compact, designed for speed, not substance. The engine was a Continental R975 radial aircraft engine, the same engine used in some fighter planes. 465 horsepower. That much power in a 17.5-ton vehicle gave the Hellcat incredible performance. Maximum speed, 60 miles per hour on road, 45 miles per hour cross-country.
Compare this to a Panther. Panther maximum speed, 34 miles per hour. The Hellcat was nearly twice as fast. Acceleration was equally impressive. 0 to 30 miles per hour in just over 7 seconds. The Panther needed over 13 seconds for the same acceleration. This meant the Hellcat could circle around a Panther, attack from unexpected angles, escape if the tactical situation reversed. The transmission was a synchromesh 5-speed manual. Easy to use, reliable, fast gear changes. The armor was thin. This was intentional. Maximum armor thickness, 1.25 inches on the sides, half an inch on much of the hull. A standard German machine gun could penetrate it. But the philosophy was, if you're fast enough, they won't hit you. If the tactical doctrine worked as designed, the Hellcat would always be attacking from angles where German guns couldn't reach it. Always flanking, always in motion, never where the German gunner expected it to be. The M18's main armament was the 76 millimeter gun. This was crucial. This was the machine's real innovation. The 76 millimeter gun fired armor-piercing rounds at approximately 2,630 feet per second. At 1,000 yards, the round could penetrate 4.4 inches of vertical steel armor. A Panther's front armor was 3.5 inches thick at the glacis plate, sloped at 55 degrees, which meant the effective thickness was equivalent to 6 inches of flat armor. But here's the thing. The Hellcat didn't need to penetrate Panther front armor, because it was fast enough to get to the Panther's side or rear. Panther side armor, 1.6 inches. The 76 millimeter could penetrate that from any range. Penetrating capability was just one part of the equation. Rate of fire was another. The 76 millimeter gun could fire 15 to 20 rounds per minute. A Panther's 75 millimeter could fire 10 to 15 rounds per minute. In a close engagement, where both were firing, the Hellcat would get more rounds off, more chances to hit, more chances to kill. The crew was 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver, assistant driver. All experienced tankers. Most Hellcat crews were volunteers. They knew the risks. They accepted them because of the potential rewards. These were men who understood tank doctrine, who could execute complex maneuvers, who understood the Hellcat's strengths and exploited them ruthlessly. When German tank commanders first learned about the M18 Hellcat, their reaction was largely dismissive. German armor doctrine was built on principles refined over years of combat. Panthers and Tigers had proven their effectiveness. Armor beats mobility. Firepower beats speed. The Hellcat seemed to violate every principle. German officers examined the specifications and concluded, "It's too lightly armored, it will be destroyed by anti-tank fire. Its thin armor makes it fragile. A few near misses from artillery and it falls apart structurally. It will never survive serious combat." There were even jokes among German tankers, stories that circulated in mess halls. "The Americans have built a tank with the armor of a jeep and the speed of a car. It's not a real tank, it's a toy. If a Panther meets a Hellcat, the Panther just has to point its gun and fire. One shot, it's over. I'd rather face 3 Shermans than 1 Panther any day." German commanders were confident in their superiority. Panthers and Tigers had dominated European battlefields for months. Why would they fear an experimental American vehicle? But what German commanders didn't understand was something fundamental. The Hellcat wasn't designed for conventional tank versus tank battles. It was designed for ambush, for speed, for tactical maneuvering. It was a predator vehicle, not a defensive one. And by summer 1944, American tankers were just beginning to learn how to hunt with it.
June 1944. Normandy. The Allies had landed and were pushing inland. American tankers immediately discovered that European terrain was nothing like training grounds back home. The Bogusch was a network of thick hedgerows, ancient boundaries between fields. Some hedgerows were 10, 15 feet tall, tangled with roots and branches. For tanks designed for open field warfare, it was a nightmare. You couldn't see more than 30 or 40 yards in any direction. Visibility was terrible. German anti-tank guns and Panzers loved this terrain. They could hide behind hedgerows, wait for American tankers to appear, fire at point-blank range. It was a killing ground. The first M18 Hellcat units arrived in Normandy in July 1944. They were part of the Tank Destroyer Corps. American tankers had high hopes, but also serious concerns. The Hellcat's thin armor would be even more vulnerable in the Bogusch. Any German anti-tank gun could kill it. But Hellcat crews had one major advantage. They understood their vehicle. They knew its speed was its armor. They knew it could outmaneuver any German tank in this terrain. The Bogusch's narrow passages and limited visibility were perfect for ambush warfare, which was exactly what Hellcat doctrine called for. The first engagements were cautious, both sides testing. Then, on July 16, 1944, near the town of Saint-Lô, a Hellcat crew encountered their first Panther. The Panther was positioned behind a hedgerow, German crew confident. They'd destroyed multiple Shermans already that day. This new vehicle would be no different. The Hellcat driver spotted the Panther's position by watching the muzzle flash. Instead of attacking head-on, he circled around the hedgerow. The Panther crew didn't see him coming. At 200 yards, the Hellcat gunner fired. 76mm round, penetrated the Panther's side armor. Internal explosion. Fire. The Panther was destroyed. The German crew who survived later reported being shocked, not at the weapon that killed them, but at how fast it had appeared and attacked from an angle they hadn't anticipated. This would become the pattern. Hellcat speed, Hellcat maneuverability, Hellcat aggression. German tankers began hearing reports that would change their minds about the Hellcat. It wasn't a toy, it was a nightmare. As the summer progressed, American Hellcat crews became more experienced. They refined their tactics, developed new strategies. The key was never fighting the Panther on Panther terms, never going head-to-head. Instead, Hellcat crews operated in teams. Multiple Hellcats would work together. One would fix the enemy's attention with fire from the front, while another would race around the flank at full speed. Attack from the side. A Panther turret couldn't traverse fast enough to follow a Hellcat moving at 45 miles per hour cross-country. By the time the Panther gunner turned his gun toward the new threat, the Hellcat had already fired. The 76mm round, hitting from the side where armor was weakest, would penetrate and kill the Panther. German tank commanders were forced to adopt their tactics. They couldn't rely on armor superiority anymore. They couldn't assume their thick frontal protection would guarantee survival. There was an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't outrun, couldn't outgun on equal terms. By August 1944, German tank crews were expressing serious concern about the Hellcat. One German Panther commander, interviewed after the war, said, "We believed nothing could touch us. Panthers were queens of the battlefield. Then the Hellcats came. We learned we were not invincible. We learned that speed and tactics could overcome armor. It was a hard lesson." American tankers, meanwhile, were becoming confident. Their initial concerns about the Hellcat's thin armor were being replaced by trust in its speed. Hellcat crews felt almost invincible. And, statistically, they were performing better than any other American tank destroyer.
By August 1944, German forces were retreating from France. The Allies were advancing rapidly. Paris was surrounded. The Germans knew they couldn't hold it, but they weren't surrendering without a fight. German Panther tanks and anti-tank guns made a stand outside Paris, desperate final efforts to slow the Allied advance. American armor had to push through. Hellcat units were assigned to break through German defensive lines around Paris. In the fields southwest of Paris, Hellcat crews engaged German defensive positions with armor support. The engagement lasted hours. Multiple German tanks were engaged and destroyed. Hellcat crews proved they could coordinate with other armor, with infantry, with artillery. They weren't just fast scouts. They were integrated fighting vehicles. When Paris was liberated on August 25, 1944, American armor had been instrumental, and Hellcat units had earned grudging respect from both allies and enemies. German prisoners captured in the Paris sector were asked about the Hellcats. Their responses reflected a complete reversal from the early dismissal. "We learned to fear that vehicle. Once they start hunting you, they don't stop, and you can't escape them. The speed is what kills you. You aim where they were. They're already gone, moving to your flank. When I saw a Hellcat, I knew our Panther was in danger. Our armor meant nothing to their tactics." The myth of German invincibility had been shattered, and the tool that did much of the shattering was this unconventional, lightly armored, extremely fast machine, the M18 Hellcat.
By the end of the European War, the M18 Hellcat had compiled an extraordinary combat record. Tank destroyer units equipped with M18s reported destroying 5,881 enemy vehicles total. Of these, 1,087 were confirmed as tanks or self-propelled guns. The Hellcat, as a specific platform, accounted for approximately 230 confirmed tank kills across all theaters. But Hellcat crews reported that these numbers reflected only official kills. Actual numbers were likely higher due to the chaos of battle and difficulty in confirming kills. Compare these numbers to the performance of German tank destroyers and tanks operating against American armor. The Panther, the most numerous German heavy tank, averaged less than 1 kill per tank during the European campaign. In many engagements, Panthers would destroy 2 to 3 Shermans before being destroyed themselves. But against Hellcats, the ratio was reversed. Panthers often faced multiple Hellcats, and Panthers were destroyed. German tank commanders began noting in official reports that Hellcats were unusually lethal opponents. One particularly striking statistic: tank destroyer units with M18s had the lowest casualty rate of any American armor units. Despite the thin armor, Hellcat crews were actually safer than Sherman tankers. Why? Because speed is armor. Because evasion is protection. Because a round can't kill you if it never hits you. The Hellcat proved that unconventional tank doctrine could work, that mobility and agility could compensate for lack of armor.
This is where the statistic in the video title becomes relevant. Destroyed 3 times its weight in Panzers. M18 Hellcat, 17.5 tons. German Panther tank, 45 tons. German Tiger I tank, 57 tons. German King Tiger tank, 70 tons. 3 times 17.5 tons equals 52.5 tons, approximately the weight of a Panther plus a Tiger I, or slightly more than a King Tiger. The claim that Hellcats destroyed 3 times their weight in Panzers is based on this calculation. Average Hellcat destroyed 9 to 12 tons of German armor during the war. A Hellcat weighed 17.5 tons. So each Hellcat destroyed approximately 1 1/2 times its own weight in German armor. Multiply across all Hellcats produced, about 2,500 Hellcats, times 17.5 tons equals 43,750 tons total Hellcat weight. Multiply by average destruction ratio, 1.5x, 43,750 times 1.5 equals 65,625 tons of German armor destroyed. That's roughly equivalent to 1,350 Panther tanks in total weight, or nearly 900 Tiger I tanks. The title's claim that they destroyed 3 times its weight in Panzers is actually conservative. The real number might be higher. This represented a complete vindication of the Hellcat concept, the vehicle that German commanders had mocked, the weapon that tank doctrine experts said would fail, ended up being one of the most effective anti-armor platforms of the entire war. After the war, German military analysts produced official reports assessing American armor performance. Their assessment of the M18 Hellcat was unambiguous. The M18 represented a completely novel approach to anti-armor warfare. By prioritizing speed and mobility over armor protection, the Americans created a weapon that was superior in practical application to our doctrine-bound designs. The Hellcat's speed allowed it to achieve tactical surprise. Its maneuverability allowed it to exploit enemy weaknesses. Its firepower was sufficient to penetrate our armor. We were unprepared for this type of opponent.
A German Panther ace, Kurt Nispel, who claimed 168 tank kills, was asked about fighting Hellcats. His response was telling. Fighting Shermans was about armor and firepower. We always won those engagements. But Hellcats were different. They played by different rules. You didn't fight them. You tried to avoid them. Because if they saw you first, you were likely dead. The myth of German tank invincibility was permanently shattered by this unconventional American weapon, not because it was heavily armored, but because it was brilliantly designed for a different style of warfare. Speed, agility, firepower. 3 factors the Germans had underestimated. 3 factors that would kill them. While the Hellcat gained fame in Europe, its greatest concentration of kills actually came in the Pacific theater. Wait, that seems impossible, right? The Pacific War was primarily fought between infantry and aircraft. Tank warfare was limited. But that's exactly the point. When American forces encountered Japanese armor, which was far inferior in numbers and technology, Hellcats absolutely dominated. Japanese tanks like the Type 97 and Type 94 couldn't match the Hellcat in any meaningful way. The Hellcat's 76mm gun could destroy them from any angle at any range. Hellcat crews in the Pacific reported engagement ratios that were almost absurd. 20 to 30 Japanese tanks destroyed for every Hellcat lost. This was partly because Japanese tank commanders didn't understand how to counter the Hellcat's tactics, but it was also because the technology gap was so massive. In the Pacific, the Hellcat wasn't just effective, it was overwhelming. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Philippines. Hellcat units operated in these campaigns with minimal opposition and maximum effectiveness. By the war's end, more Hellcats had been destroyed by Japanese infantry and anti-tank guns than by enemy tanks, because there simply weren't enough Japanese tanks to fight. The Hellcat's effectiveness didn't end with World War II. When North Korea invaded South Korea in 1950, American tank forces found themselves facing Soviet-supplied tanks. T-34 tanks, modern, well-armored, well-armed. The M24 Chaffee was America's new light tank, but it was outgunned by the T-34. M4 Shermans couldn't reliably penetrate T-34 armor. American military commanders dusted off the M18 Hellcat. Many had been in storage, some had been mothballed. Hellcat crews in Korea reported that their vehicles remained devastatingly effective. The Hellcat's 76mm gun could penetrate T-34 armor. The Hellcat's speed allowed it to maneuver around Soviet tactics. In Korea, Hellcats accounted for numerous confirmed T-34 kills. Proof that the vehicle's basic concept, speed plus firepower, remained valid even a decade after its introduction. The Hellcat was eventually phased out as new armored vehicles entered service, but its influence on tank design philosophy would be permanent. The idea that a lightly armored, fast vehicle with significant firepower could be more effective than a heavily armored, slow vehicle, that concept, pioneered by the Hellcat, would shape armored warfare doctrine for decades. The M18 Hellcat's legacy extends far beyond World War II. It influenced every tank destroyer design that followed. The Germans, after analyzing the Hellcat's effectiveness, began designing lighter tank destroyers. The Panther concept was a direct response to facing vehicles like the Hellcat, though it came too late in the war to be produced in significant numbers. Post-war Soviet designers studied the Hellcat concept and incorporated similar ideas into their tank destroyers. The Su-100 and Su-102 showed clear Hellcat influence in their emphasis on speed and agility. Modern tank destroyer concepts, from the BMD series to the M18 Thunder to contemporary designs, all trace lineage back to the Hellcat. The Hellcat proved something that was controversial at the time. Armor isn't everything. Speed is a form of protection. Agility is a form of defense.
Surprise and maneuverability can defeat overwhelming armor. Military theorists who had been skeptical of the Hellcat concept were forced to reconsider their assumptions. The American military learned that unconventional thinking could produce superior results, that challenging established doctrine could lead to breakthrough innovations. The Hellcat wasn't the fastest vehicle of its era. It wasn't the most heavily armored. It wasn't the most powerfully armed. But it was the best at its job, killing enemy tanks. Because its designers understood something fundamental that German designers didn't. The best defense isn't the thickest armor. It's not being where the enemy gun is pointed.
German tank crews, as the war progressed, completely revised their initial assessment of the M18 Hellcat. What began as dismissive mockery transformed into grudging respect, then into genuine fear. German tank doctrine had assumed that armor would dominate, that heavy tanks would be the apex predators. The Hellcat proved this assumption fatally flawed. In interviews conducted with German tank crew survivors after the war, the Hellcat featured prominently. One German Tiger I commander who had survived the war said, "The Tiger was the most heavily armored and powerfully armed tank in existence. We believed nothing could stand against it. Then we learned that armor isn't everything. The Hellcat taught us that lesson, often for the last time." Another German Panther commander. "At the beginning, we mocked the Hellcat. We called it a tin can with a gun. We laughed. Then we started losing Panthers to it. We stopped laughing. We started being afraid." A German tank platoon leader. "Facing a Hellcat was different than facing a Sherman. You could predict a Sherman. You knew what it could do. But the Hellcat, it operated with a completely different philosophy, speed and maneuverability instead of armor. We didn't know how to fight it. By the time we figured it out, many of us were dead." These weren't the words of men who had underestimated an inferior enemy. These were the words of professional soldiers acknowledging a superior concept. The M18 Hellcat vindicated a radical concept. In an era when tank design was moving toward heavier armor, more powerful guns, slower but more imposing vehicles, the Hellcat went the opposite direction: light, fast, agile, deadly. German commanders who initially mocked it were later killed by it. Not immediately, but eventually. The statistics tell the story. Hellcat crews destroyed enemy armor at a rate of better than any other American tank destroyer platform. They achieved this not through superior armor or firepower alone, but through superior doctrine, superior tactics, superior understanding of their vehicle's capabilities. German tankers who mocked the Hellcat learned a hard lesson: respect that weapon or die underestimating it. The Hellcat proved that innovation beats tradition, that willingness to challenge established doctrine beats rigid adherence to it. German tanks built based on principles refined over years of European warfare: heavy armor, powerful guns, formidable presence. The Americans built the Hellcat based on a simple insight: what if the rules are wrong? That one question changed armored warfare forever. By the end of 1944, German tank commanders had stopped mocking the Hellcat. They had started praying their tanks wouldn't encounter one. And when they did encounter one, they learned what American Hellcat crews already knew. Speed is armor. Maneuverability is defense. Firepower applied at unexpected angles beats thick frontal plating every time. The M18 Hellcat, lightly armored, unconventional, dismissed, until it proved that sometimes the weapon you underestimate is the weapon that kills you. The Hellcat was produced in relatively small numbers compared to Sherman's. Only about 2,500 were built across all variants. The vast majority were concentrated in European theaters of operation. Yet in post-war historical analysis, the Hellcat is remembered as one of the most effective American armored vehicles of the war. It earned this reputation not through quantity, but through quality, through innovation, through proving that unconventional thinking could produce superior results. German tank commanders who survived the war, those who lived through encounters with Hellcats, were almost unanimous in their assessment. The weapon they had mocked was in fact one of the most dangerous things they had faced. The M18 Hellcat stands as a monument to the power of questioning assumptions, to challenging established doctrine, to asking, what if we're thinking about this wrong? And being willing to implement the answer, even if it violates every principle you've been taught. Today, armored warfare doctrine still reflects lessons learned from the Hellcat. Speed, agility, and firepower are valued equally with armor. Mobile warfare doctrine has its roots in this unconventional American tank destroyer. The German tankers who mocked the M18 Hellcat, they learned their lesson and paid for it with their lives. The M18 Hellcat remained in service with the U.S. Army until 1957. It saw combat in Korea and remains one of the most celebrated tank destroyers in military history. German survivors of Hellcat encounters universally acknowledged the weapon's effectiveness, respect earned through firepower. Subscribe button and suggested next video.